She laughed, leaning just a little too close, and whispered, "If you're really his best friend, prove you can last longer than him." In that moment, my heart didn't stand a chance. The first time I noticed her, it wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary, an afternoon at my best friend's apartment, the kind of Sunday that smelled faintly of brewed coffee and warm sunlight through half-closed blinds. I was there to hang out, maybe watch a game or help with some errands, nothing more. And then she walked in. She moved with that effortless grace older women sometimes have, the kind that makes a room feel smaller and warmer at the same time. Her hair, dark with hints of silver catching the light, fell just past her shoulders. When she smiled, it was calm, confident, but something about it hinted at quiet mischief. She greeted me with a nod and a glance that lingered a fraction longer than necessary, and my chest betrayed me before my brain could catch up. We started with small talk. I offered to help her carry some grocery bags from the kitchen, and when she took them from me, our hands brushed slightly. Not an accident, I realized later, and certainly not unwelcome. The touch was brief, but it left a warmth that spread up my arm, something more than physical. It was a reminder that I was suddenly aware of her in a way I hadn't expected, aware of her presence, her scent, the subtle sway of her movements. Then came the teasing. I had known her as my friend's sister, someone always just on the edges of jokes and family stories. But now, leaning casually against the counter, she smiled at me knowingly and said, "If you're really his best friend, prove you can last longer than him." It was playful, innocent enough on the surface, but the way she said it, the slight tilt of her head, the sparkle in her eyes, sent my thoughts spiraling. I laughed, trying to mask the sudden heat rising to my cheeks, my mind scrambling to interpret what she meant. Was it really a challenge? Or just a tease? Either way, it lingered. I caught myself noticing details I hadn't before, the way the sunlight hit her cheek, highlighting the soft lines that spoke of years and experiences, the gentle way she adjusted her cardigan around her shoulders, the quiet steadiness of her voice that somehow drew my attention more than anyone else in the room. I realized, with a little shock, that I had been looking forward to these casual encounters more than I wanted to admit. Even as I laughed at her teasing remark, part of me was thinking about her. About the warmth of her presence, the subtle brush of her hand, the quiet way she seemed to command attention without trying. And though I tried to bury it, the spark of curiosity, of something unspoken between us, had already been lit. By the time I left that afternoon, I couldn't shake it. The teasing lingered in my mind, a mix of embarrassment, intrigue, and a strange, thrilling sense of possibility. And for the first time, I realized that my friend's sister, my friend's older sister, was no longer just part of the background of my life. She had become the quiet center of it, and I had no idea what that would mean for me, or for us. After that afternoon, I couldn't stop noticing her. It was subtle at first, a glance here, a laugh that lingered there, but gradually, the awareness became something that tugged at my chest every time she was near. I told myself it was just curiosity, admiration even. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The first real moment came when I met her at a small gathering my friend had organized. The apartment was warm with chatter, the clink of glasses, and the faint aroma of baked snacks. I found myself gravitating toward her without thinking, drawn by the easy calm she carried. She was talking with someone else, her voice low and musical, and yet, when our eyes met across the room, it felt like a private current ran between us. My stomach flipped in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. She moved closer under some pretext, reaching for a book on the shelf or adjusting a candle, and our shoulders brushed. A small contact, almost accidental, yet enough to send heat up my arm. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something warm, a little earthy, with just a hint of citrus. It settled in my memory in a way I couldn't shake. I realized I was noticing everything about her. The way her laughter softened when she was listening intently, the subtle lines at the corners of her eyes that appeared when she smiled genuinely, the graceful way she held herself even when tired. There was an elegance born of experience, something I admired but felt slightly intimidated by. And then there was her hands, long, expressive, the kind that moved gently but confidently through the space around her. At the same time, there was the teasing. She caught me looking once and tilted her head slightly, smirk playing at her lips. "Caught thinking about something?" she asked, her tone light but knowing. I laughed awkwardly, trying to deflect, but she didn't let it go entirely. That half-smile, that casual teasing, lingered in my mind long after. It wasn't just admiration. There was tension now, soft, subtle, like the quiet hum before a storm. Sitting near her, I became acutely aware of proximity, the warmth radiating from her shoulder, the faint brush of her hair when she leaned slightly, the rhythm of her breathing. Every casual touch held a weight I wasn't entirely prepared for, yet didn't want to avoid. And the more I noticed, the more I questioned myself. Was this inappropriate? Dangerous, even? She was older, worldly, confident in ways I was still discovering about myself. Yet the connection, the quiet, mutual recognition, was undeniable. I was aware of the age gap, of social perception, yet these thoughts seemed to only make the moments we shared more intense. By the end of the evening, I realized that this was no longer harmless curiosity. Something had shifted. The playful spark from that first teasing challenge had ignited into a slow, steady flame of awareness. Every glance, every accidental touch, every word she spoke carried weight I hadn't anticipated. And though I was hesitant, the pull toward her warmth, her presence, her quiet intrigue, was impossible to ignore. I left that night thinking about her, not just her beauty, but the subtle power she carried, the way she could make a room feel smaller and warmer at the same time. And I knew, with a mixture of thrill and fear, that this wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden confession or forced moment. It happened one evening when I offered to help her with something small, organizing boxes in her apartment that had been gathering dust, the kind of mundane task no one else wanted to touch. She accepted my help with that quiet, graceful nod she had, and I felt both nervous and strangely at ease, aware of how close we were standing. The room was warm, softly lit by a lamp in the corner, casting a golden hue over everything. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the smell of old paper and polished wood. As we sorted through books and small trinkets, our hands brushed more than once, not accidental anymore, but lingering just enough to make me notice. Each touch sent a subtle warmth through me, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand on end. I caught myself stealing glances at her profile, the gentle curve of her jaw, the way her hair fell naturally across her cheek, the softness in her eyes even when focused on mundane tasks. We started talking, not about anything forced but about life. She asked questions with genuine curiosity, and I found myself sharing things I rarely said aloud, small regrets, ambitions, fleeting fears. There was an openness in her gaze that encouraged it, an understanding that felt rare and unexpected. She listened carefully, tilting her head slightly, her expression soft yet attentive, and for the first time, I felt like someone older, wiser, was truly hearing me, not just hearing the words, but the spaces between them. At one point, she laughed at something I said, lightly, almost like a brush of warmth, and leaned closer than necessary to reach for a book. Our shoulders touched, and this time, I didn't move away. I noticed the steadiness of her breathing, the calm heartbeat I imagined beneath her chest, and I felt a strange, unspoken reassurance. It wasn't desire in the sharp, impulsive sense, it was deeper. It was the comfort of connection, mixed with the thrill of subtle tension. She caught my gaze once and smiled, just slightly, as if acknowledging what we both knew but neither said aloud. The teasing from before hadn't vanished, it had softened into something quieter, more profound. She seemed comfortable in the space between us, and I realized I could breathe easier here, with her, than in many other places in my life. The moment wasn't cinematic. We didn't fall into confessions or gestures that would make a storybook scene. But it was enough, the shared laughter, the casual touches, the honesty in conversation, to plant a seed. A seed that hinted at something more, something I was both curious and cautious to explore. As I left that evening, I lingered by the doorway longer than necessary, catching her gaze one last time. There was a quiet acknowledgement there, A mutual understanding that we had crossed a subtle line from casual acquaintance into something deeper. And though the world outside still felt ordinary and familiar, I walked away aware that something had shifted. Something delicate and slow, yet unavoidably present, was growing between us. I didn't know where it would lead. I only knew I wanted to be near her again, to navigate that unspoken current of warmth, tension, and quiet trust, and to see if she felt it too. It was a quiet evening, the kind that feels intimate even in a crowded room. My friend had left for a short errand, leaving the two of us in the soft glow of his living room lights. The hum of the refrigerator in the background, the faint scent of evening coffee, and the warmth of the apartment created a cocoon that made proximity feel inevitable. She leaned casually against the counter, arms folded, a playful smile tugging at her lips. Her eyes met mine with a sharpness that made me swallow before I realized it. "So," she said, voice teasing but low enough that it felt like she was speaking directly to me. "If you're really his best friend, prove it!" The challenge wasn't direct, it was a tease. But the way she said it, the way she leaned just slightly closer than necessary, sent a jolt through me. My pulse quickened. I wasn't sure if I was nervous, excited, or both, but every part of me became acutely aware of her presence. The warmth radiating from her shoulder when she shifted closer, the subtle sway of her posture, even the faint brush of her hair against my sleeve, it all seemed magnified. I tried to respond casually, attempting humor to mask my flustered state. "I think I can manage," I said, laughing lightly. But she didn't let it go. Instead, she tilted her head, eyes glinting with mischief, and leaned in just a fraction more, close enough that I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the warmth of the room. Every subtle motion, the curve of her smile, the soft rise of her eyebrows, the gentle way her hand rested near mine on the counter, felt deliberate, even if it wasn't. I realized then that the teasing was more than play. It was a test, a probe into the boundaries between us. And in that moment, I understood how much I wanted to meet it, to rise to it, not for her, but for the sense of closeness it promised. Yet, there was hesitation, too. The age gap, the social expectation, the internal caution, they all whispered warnings in my mind. But each glance, each laugh, each fleeting touch drew me closer to ignoring those warnings. She moved to adjust something on the counter, and our hands brushed again. This time, I let it linger, just a fraction longer than necessary, and I caught the faint warmth of her skin. My chest tightened at the proximity, at the silent electricity that passed between us. The playful teasing had become a dance, a negotiation of unspoken desire and cautious restraint. For a few minutes, the world outside seemed to vanish. The soft lighting, the quiet hum of the room, the way she looked at me with amusement and curiosity, it all created a tension that was electric yet gentle, thrilling yet safe. There was no rush, no pressure, only the delicate awareness of closeness and possibility. By the time the evening ended and we returned to the group, the teasing had left its mark. I walked away aware of something shifting, a new dimension in our relationship that wasn't just playful, it was charged, emotional, and deeply intimate. And though neither of us spoke of it, I knew we had crossed an invisible line, one that would shape the quiet moments to come. It happened on one of those quiet evenings that feel almost suspended outside time. The apartment was dim, the city lights spilling softly through the windows, casting long, warm shadows across the room. I had come over under the pretext of helping her with a few minor chores, but the air between us had changed. The teasing, the playful tension, it had evolved into something heavier, something that made the air feel electric in its quietness. We sat side by side on the couch, the soft hum of the city below us providing a gentle backdrop. She leaned back casually, one hand resting near mine on the cushion. I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her, the faint brush of her sleeve against my arm. It was an ordinary touch, but it held weight, a quiet acknowledgement of closeness. I swallowed, heart hammering, aware that the moments between us were charged with unspoken truths. I've been thinking, I started, my voice catching slightly. Her eyes met mine, patient and attentive, and I felt a strange courage in the steadiness of her gaze. About us. About how things feel when I'm around you. I paused, the words hovering in the warm air between us, almost too heavy to speak. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched, the softness in her eyes encouraging me to continue. I know it's complicated, that there's the age difference, and I don't even know if it's appropriate to feel this way, I admitted, my fingers brushing hers unintentionally, a tiny, accidental contact that I let linger. The warmth of her skin, the steadiness of her presence, made it impossible to pull away. She exhaled softly, a small smile tugging at her lips, the kind that held reassurance without words. I've wondered the same, she said quietly. Her voice was steady, gentle, yet there was a vulnerability in it that mirrored my own. I wasn't sure if you felt it too, or if it was just me imagining things. Relief and exhilaration collided in my chest. There was no rush, no dramatic gesture. Just honesty, quiet and tentative, bridging the gap that had existed between us for weeks. Her hand moved slightly closer, brushing the back of mine with a softness that sent warmth spiraling through me. I realized that vulnerability wasn't about confession alone, it was about trust, about letting someone see the hidden parts of yourself without fear. We spent the next few minutes in silence, letting the moment settle. Each subtle movement, the way she adjusted the blanket over her lap, the slight tilt of her head, the quiet rise and fall of her chest, spoke volumes. It was a slow, deliberate intimacy, far more powerful than words. When she finally leaned slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing mine, it felt like permission. Not for a kiss, not for a leap, but permission to be seen, to be close, to acknowledge that the quiet tension between us was real. And in that acknowledgement, the slow burn that had been simmering beneath teasing smiles, casual touches, and shared glances finally had room to breathe. By the end of the evening, we weren't just friend and friend's sister. We were two people navigating a delicate, unspoken connection, aware of its complications but drawn irresistibly toward each other. And though nothing had changed dramatically in the world around us, everything had changed in the space between us. The days that followed our confession carried a new kind of quiet intensity. There was no need for grand gestures or declarations. The energy between us shifted subtly, like a current moving just beneath the surface, felt but not always seen. Each shared space, each casual meeting, became charged with a delicate intimacy that neither of us tried to name aloud, yet both of us acknowledged it in fleeting touches, lingering looks, and the way our voices softened when speaking to each other. It was on a rainy afternoon that the change became undeniable. We found ourselves walking together under a shared umbrella, the rain drumming softly against the fabric and creating a private little world around us. I noticed the way she adjusted her coat, the faint curl of damp hair falling across her cheek, and the warmth radiating from her hand against mine as we held the umbrella. The casual proximity, the comfort of walking side by side, carried a weight of connection that words could not capture. Later, back in her apartment, we moved through the quiet evening like it had been choreographed for intimacy. We shared simple tasks, organizing a bookshelf, making tea, folding laundry, but each action was underscored by a heightened awareness of each other. Her fingers brushed mine as we reached for the same cup, her shoulder pressed lightly against mine as we moved through the narrow kitchen space. I felt the subtle electricity of touch, a thrill that was tender and entirely human. Our conversation that evening drifted into the personal again, deeper than ever before. She spoke about past regrets and triumphs with a softness that made her seem simultaneously strong and vulnerable. I listened, tracing the lines of her face in my mind, noting the quiet steadiness in her gaze and the way her breathing slowed when she spoke about things she held dear. I realized that our connection was more than attraction. It was trust, shared understanding, and a quiet sense of being truly seen. At one point, she reached for a blanket, draping it over both of us as we settled on the couch. Her arm brushed mine, lightly, deliberately perhaps, and I felt the subtle warmth of her body pressed close. The space between us was intimate without words, a conversation conducted through presence and gentle touch. I noticed her glance, half teasing, half soft, and the quiet acceptance in it mirrored my own longing. There was no need to rush. No need to force anything. We simply existed together in that warm, quiet space, letting the slow burn of tension settle into comfort, into trust, into intimacy. Every shared glance, every brush of hands, every quiet pause was a wordless affirmation that we were no longer navigating this alone. We were navigating it together. By the end of the evening, as the rain eased and the room filled with the golden glow of lamplight, I felt it clearly. We had crossed into a space that was ours alone. The teasing, the tension, the quiet longing, it had all matured into mutual understanding. Our hands brushed one last time before she set the cup down, a lingering touch that carried the weight of all that had passed. In that moment, it was clear that we were no longer merely friend and friend's sister. We were something more, something real, and entirely ours. The morning light filtered softly through her curtains, warm and golden, spilling across the kitchen floor. I was already there, making coffee, but the quiet hum of the city outside was nothing compared to the gentle rhythm of the apartment around us. She emerged from her bedroom in a loose sweater, hair still tousled from sleep, and for a moment, everything paused. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that had no pretense, no teasing, just calm warmth, and I felt the familiar flutter in my chest. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic proclamations this time. Everything between us had settled into something natural, something steady. Our slow burn had found its quiet home. We moved around each other in the kitchen with a kind of effortless familiarity, pouring coffee, setting out mugs, and exchanging small, meaningful glances. When our hands brushed over the coffee pot, either of us pulled away. Instead, I felt the subtle warmth of her skin, the reassuring steadiness of her presence, and let it linger for a heartbeat longer than necessary. That small touch spoke volumes, no words needed, just an acknowledgement that we belonged in this space together. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the steam from our mugs curling lazily between us. I noticed the little things, the way her fingers wrapped around the cup, the soft sigh she let out as she leaned back in her chair, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders. She caught my gaze, and I saw it reflected there, the quiet joy of connection, of trust, of something tender and wholly mutual. At one point, she leaned forward slightly, resting her elbow on the table and her chin in her hand, her other hand brushing against mine. The touch was fleeting, deliberate, and yet entirely comfortable. I felt the warmth of her hand, the softness of her skin, the quiet intimacy of proximity. It wasn't about passion. It was about closeness, about shared life, about the simple, grounding presence of someone who had become central to your world. We laughed together over a small, shared joke, the kind that only the two of us would understand, and it felt effortless. The teasing from before had softened into something deeper, familiarity wrapped in affection, admiration tempered by trust. She reached over to brush a stray hair from my forehead, her fingers lingering just long enough to make my pulse skip, and I realized that the slow-burn tension that had defined our early interactions had transformed into warmth, security, and mutual delight. By the time we finished our coffee, it was clear that this was not just a fleeting connection. We had crossed every invisible boundary cautiously, respectfully, and intentionally. There was no rush, no forced drama, just the quiet, fulfilling presence of each other. Sitting together, shoulder to shoulder, hands occasionally brushing, I felt the steady comfort of being seen, understood, and accepted. As she leaned back and let her gaze settle on me, there was a shared understanding in the silence. The teasing, the tension, the quiet longing, they had all matured into something enduring. Something real. Something wholly ours. And in that morning light, with the warmth of her presence beside me, I finally understood that slow-burn romance wasn't about fireworks or spectacle. It was about moments like this, quiet, tender, and utterly alive. We didn't need to say it. The gentle brush of her hand, the soft smiles, the shared glances, all of it said enough. We had found each other, completely and quietly, and that was more than enough.